Hello, my name is Charles Varder, and this is my 1942 Pontiac staff car. This was typical of the four-door staff cars that you would have found during the Second World War. This would have been for your junior grade officers, probably below a colonel. Usually Pontiac, Chevrolet, Plymouth would have been the car of choice for them. Your upper grade officers, colonel on up to general, you would have found them in a Cadillac, Buick Roadmaster, or even a Packard were some of their favorites. Characteristic, as some of you may know, this was built by Pontiac in Detroit. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the next day, all cars that were being manufactured for civilians became government property. The government said, we will need these cars for use in the military because we are now at war with Japan. Cars that were already in the pipeline on their way to dealers and on dealers' lots were allowed to be sold. Now, if a car being manufactured on the assembly line after December 7th was any other color than black, if the car was black, it went into government service as a black car. If it was any other color, it was resprayed olive drab. And every part of the car was sprayed. All the chrome parts, which you see here, the trim, stainless steel, any part of the car that was shiny was sprayed a flat olive drab. And of course, again, that was so it wouldn't reflect sunlight. It could be used in a situation where it shouldn't be seen. These bumpers, if you'll notice, are painted white on the ends. This was typical of cars that were shipped over to England, and a number of these were for use by the U.S. Army in England because during the build-up to D-Day especially, 1 million U.S. servicemen shipped out to England. And the reason the bumpers were painted white was during the blackout in London, there was no light. So you could see the bumpers of the car, bicycle bumpers, truck bumpers, all these. So this would have been typical of a service vehicle in the London or England area. Again, typical Army fashion. This was one of the Army's registration numbers. Every vehicle on the hood had the word USA and then a serial number. Of course, this is a four-door, and you'll notice all the chrome trim here, stainless steel, whatever, has been painted olive drab. It is a four-door, which, typically most officers had an aide, and it was his job, once the car reached the curb, was to jump out and open the door for the officer, whether he's arriving or leaving, either way. And of course, you can see the quite comfortable back seat with lots of leg room, ideally situated for officers. So the car could carry 1 to 3 officers in the back seat and an aide plus a driver in the front seat. Drivers were often privates and often women, as we know, and especially in England during the war, men being mainly in the front lines, most officers had lady drivers. And again, this, as you can see, is typical of the period. On February 2nd of 1942, all civilian production stopped on passenger motor cars. And it was converted into building everything from tanks, weapons carriers, cargo trucks, anti-aircraft guns. So the entire automotive industry retooled. Some of the cars were actually created with blackout lights as blackout cars. In fact, they're known as the Blackout series. Those were somewhat more rare. Generally, the cars came off the assembly line pretty much as civilian cars and were simply sprayed olive drab. Again, as I said, this is a Pontiac. Everything right down to the hubcaps was spray painted olive drab. And of course, they had no white wall tires for the duration, so this would have been typical to have black wall tires. Also, it has the Allied markings, so the white star for identification purposes. And as I say, mostly these were used stateside or in Great Britain prior to the D-Day invasion. However, Once Europe became somewhat secure, you will see these in Paris and some of the cities on the European continent. As we know, General Eisenhower and General Patton both had their Cadillacs over in the European theater as the war went on. This car is typically, it was built in Detroit, and again, it was mainly used in the motor pool and especially for officers' use on the bases and overseas. I use it mainly in parades, again, to honor veterans. We do use it in reenactments when we need officer staff to be transported. The motor was anything from a straight 8 was available that time with Pontiac to an inline 6. They had a top speed of probably 80, 90 miles an hour on a good road. So that's pretty much as you see a configuration for a World War II officer staff car.